All right, Earl, you're on.
Thank you, sir. Great. Is everybody having fun yet?
Yes.
Are you having fun yet? Yeah. All right, great. Welcome again to the 19th Annual African American Cultural Celebration. Yeah. Again, my name is Earl Imes. I'm your host of the History, Film, and Enterprise. And our next presenter is another one of my favorite presenters. All of them are my favorite. And again, remember, this is the History, Film, and Enterprise, and instead of an Enterprise panel, the theme is historic preservation. And so our next presenter is going to be researching the Underground Railroad and the historic preservation of the Picot-Armstead-Pettiford house in Plymouth, North Carolina, by Mr. Willie Drye. And Mr. Drye is a journalist and an author. He has won awards for his writing about sciences of hurricanes and their social and financial impacts. He has published 3 nonfiction books and is contributing editor for National Geographic News. He's a 6th generation Tar Heel, a veteran of the United States Army Medical Corps, a graduate of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, as I mentioned, an award-winning author, contributor, editor to National Geographic, and I will also say, just like Milton and the George H. White Center, he has been generous and gracious enough to loan us some artifacts and also part of this exhibit that we'll share at the end. But without further ado, give a big hand for Mr. Willie Drye.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction, Earl. I appreciate it. My name is Willie Drye, and I just blew away the program here. Hold on a second. I am also chairman of the Plymouth Museum Council, which was formed a few years ago, 501c3 organization to try to preserve and restore the Picot-Armstead-Pettiford house. Picot is the French pronunciation. The pronunciation kind of evolved to Picot after the family came here from France. The house that you're looking at, the photo that you see there, was made in 1974. Unfortunately, the house has deteriorated considerably since then, and it is in need of some pretty serious work. I'm going to tell you a little bit about it, about the histories and the mysteries surrounding this house. It's both fascinating and frustrating. I find a clue, and I also discover then that another piece is missing. But we're trying to stay with it and try to unravel the mystery of this house. I am an old newspaper reporter, and one thing I learned along the way is that if your mama says she loves you, you've still got to check it out. And I do not want to weave a fairy tale about this. I want to make sure that we are accurate about how this house was used. One of the mysteries that I've mentioned here is if you see in the upper right corner there, trap door. There are 2 trap doors in the house automatically. What in the world was that for? Why was it there? It is an entrance to a cellar that has since been filled in. Cellars are very unusual in that part of North Carolina, northeastern North Carolina, and this house actually had a cellar in it. The gentleman in the lower right corner, I think, is Reuben Pettiford. Mr. Pettiford was an African-American brick mason in Plymouth in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. He also was elected to the Plymouth Town Council in 1882. Undoubtedly, he was one of the first, had to be the first African-American to hold elected office in Plymouth. And you're going to hear a little bit more about Mr. Pettiford a little later. As I said, by 2011, the Picot-Armstead-Pettiford house had deteriorated considerably. You can see there in the background of the photo on the left that it is getting kind of run down there. But at that time, Plymouth became part of the North Carolina Small Town Main Street program. And we were able to get a grant from Preservation North Carolina to help put a new roof on the house. The photo in the left-hand corner there shows historian Carl Westmoreland and his wife Carol and Father Henry Burdick of the Grace Episcopal Church there in Plymouth. Mr. Westmoreland has been very, very interested in trying to preserve and restore this house. He's made many trips to Plymouth at his own expense to help with it. Mr. Westmoreland is with the National Underground Railroad Freedom Foundation in Cincinnati. And he is, in fact, I've got to get in touch with him soon to let him know about this presentation here. In 2011, as I said, Preservation North Carolina gave the Plymouth Small Town Main Street Committee a grant for $10,000, the Stedman Incentive Grant, which was really got us launched into the effort to restore the house. Unfortunately, at the time, we did not have a 501c3 to accept the grant. So we had some money, but we didn't have any way of receiving it. And we were able to work with the Washington County Historical Society, who agreed to act as a pass-through for the money so that we could get our hands on it and get to work on the house, because we could not afford to wait at all to get the work underway. The roof was in bad shape, the house was in bad shape, and we needed to get that roof up there quickly. So the Washington County Historical Society, which was a registered 501c3 corporation, agreed to accept the money. And all of the financial activity, by the way, has been monitored by a certified public accountant there in Plymouth. We have put somewhere in the ballpark of $32,000 into the house. I know that it doesn't look like it, but we have put about that much money into the roof and the foundation, and every nickel has been monitored by a CPA there in Plymouth. Dominion North Carolina Power Company also gave us a $5,000 grant. Dominion North Carolina Power, which of course is out of Virginia, serves that part of northeastern North Carolina. The gentleman you see there in the white shirt and the tie is Michael Thompson, who was Dominion North Carolina Power's legislative representative at the time. Unfortunately, Mr. Thompson is suffering from a serious illness and wasn't able to continue his work, but he did give us some invaluable help to get started. And C.J. Belch of Mackey's Ferry made an incredibly valuable and unusual contribution. He donated cypress lumber to be used for rebuilding the roof, and cypress lumber is not cheap, and it was that was what the original rafters were made of. So we were sort of able to continue using not the original materials, but materials identical to the original materials. And this is when the roofing materials were delivered in 2012. Lyons Metal Roofing gave us the roofing at a great discount. I think it was about half price or less for the for the cost of the tin roofing. we were really proud of this. This shows the new tin roof going up. But on the right there, you see the roofing workers working on the roof there, and you see something there at their feet. That is the original cypress shingle roof that was put on that house around 1830. So not only did we get a new roof on there, but we preserved the original roof. And that is something that you don't see a lot of those anymore. So we've got the, we built a new roof and we preserved the historic roof at the same time. This is something that my friend Earl pointed out to me. If you can see there are Roman numerals or approximate Roman numerals on those rafters there. Those are original rafters. And Earl, correct me if I'm wrong here, but enslaved people at that time were not allowed to learn and to read and write or to do even simple mathematics. But if they were going to be able to build a house, they had to have some way of knowing which part went where. So if I understood Earl correctly, this meant that they created a system of Roman numerals so that the workers would know where each piece went. And these marks on the rafters in the original, and these are, as I said, these rafters were not replaced. They were left. Not all of the rafters needed replacement. These marks indicate that the house may have, probably was built by enslaved artisans. And that also adds to its significance as an African-American landmark. Excuse me, I just jumped ahead of myself. On the right there, you see the planking for the new roof, and this was part of what Mr. Belch's contribution was made for, and it looks like this thing just wants to go ahead without me. But anyway, this was a very proud moment. September 26, 2012, the roof was completed, and these guys that you see working there are some of the roofers that were working on it. They were out of Pinetown, North Carolina, which is near, not far from Plymouth. I used construction companies. I know that there is a desire to try to use local labor whenever possible. I was advised by some folks at Edgecombe Community College, which has a historic preservation program, to use certain companies that were very familiar with restoring this older buildings like this. These guys were recommended as one of those groups. I also had some brick masons out of Williamsburg, Virginia, who did some work on the foundation and the piers supporting the house. And here is some of that foundation work. These guys were with K-Aid Construction Company of Williamsburg. Creston Simmons, who is from a little town called Roper, which is nearby there, restored most of the original sill on the house. We do still have some part of the sill that needs to be restored, and that's one thing that any money that will be raised will be used for. You see on the photo on the left there, the pier has this indenture, this looks like it's been scooped out there. That is the original brick foundation. The only thing I can think of is that pier was hit by gunfire during the Civil War. Plymouth changed hands 3 times during the Civil War. There was near constant fighting there. Literally bullets were flying everywhere. The Picot-Armstead-Pettiford house was one of only 11 buildings in Plymouth that was not damaged or destroyed. And I think that this almost certainly is an indication that pier was hit by gunfire at some point during the fighting in Plymouth. And it did not need replacing. It has been left as it is, and I hope that one day when the house is restored and we put it to its desired use, which is the Museum of African American History, that will become a feature of that house. And that's just to give you a little bit better look at that brick there. Now we get into the more interesting and speculative part of the presentation. This is just a very brief summary of some of the folks who lived at this house between 1830 and 1970. Peter Picot built the house around 1830. He was the son of Dr. Julian Picot, who is thought to have been Plymouth's first medical doctor. People died young in those days. Peter Picot died at the age of 34. He left a widow and 2 young children. In 1841, his widow, Marietta Blunt Picot, married Dr. Robert Armstead, and the family, Dr. Armstead moved into the house with his new wife there at the corner of West Main and Monroe Street in Plymouth. 1857, Dr. Robert Armstead died, leaving the house to his son, Thomas S. Armstead the Younger. The reason I make that distinction is because Thomas S. Armstead also had an uncle who was named Thomas S. Armstead, so it gets kind of confusing. The younger Thomas S. Armstead was a teenager at the time. In 1858, Thomas S. Armstead entered school at the University of North Carolina. At that time, he had been living with a housekeeper there, a woman by the name of Jane C. Ward. She is another very mysterious figure in this story. Jane Ward moved there in 1843, when Marietta Blunt Picot died. She was quite a wealthy woman herself. She owned property which was very unusual at that time. She stayed at the house for many years, presumably as a caretaker for the young Thomas Armstead and as a housekeeper. Anyway, Thomas Armstead entered the University of North Carolina in 1858. Jane C. Ward is now, this is according to the U.S. Census, she is the only full-time resident of that house. In those days, you didn't just dash home from Chapel Hill on the weekends. It was a 2-day trip. You had to go, if you were going from Plymouth, you had to take a riverboat up to Weldon or somewhere like that and get on a train, and then take a train to Raleigh, and then change trains in Raleigh and go to Chapel Hill. So you left Plymouth to go to school at Carolina. You probably weren't going to come back until late November. So Jane Ward lived there, had use of the house most of the time during this period. Thomas Armstead graduated from Carolina in 1862. He immediately entered the Confederate Army, and he won't return until 1865. And I will point out, I'll explain the significance of this in just a moment. In 1873, Thomas Armstead, the Armstead family in Plymouth was quite wealthy at that time. In 1873, Thomas Armstead used the house and other property as collateral for a large, very large loan. And things started going south for him almost immediately afterwards. There was a severe economic downturn in 1873, and he sort of started hemorrhaging money. And by 1886, he was bankrupt, and he was forced to sell the house at a public auction. The house went through several owners between 1886 and 1914. In 1914, Reuben Pettiford, who I pointed out a moment ago, bought the house. He was a very successful African-American brick mason in Plymouth. And then from around 1916, Mr. Pettiford died in 1916, and from around 1916 until around 1970, the house was used as a hotel and a boarding house for African Americans visiting Plymouth. Now here is where it gets really, really interesting. Local oral history has long linked the Picot-Armstead-Pettiford house to the Underground Railroad. There supposedly was a tunnel that ran from the cellar. Remember, I pointed out the cellar a moment ago. There supposedly was a tunnel that ran from the house to the Roanoke River. The house overlooks the Roanoke River. It's not very far away. The house sits up on what passes for a hill, I guess, in that part of North Carolina. And if you stand in a second-story window, you have a commanding view, a very clear view of the Roanoke River. I mentioned Jane C. Ward. as being the only occupant of the house, the only full-time occupant of the house from around 1858 to 1865. I was doing research on this last summer, and I belong to a newspaper website called newspapers.com. It's an amazing website. Was poking around on that website, and I came across this, and I nearly fell out of my chair. I could not believe it. This was posted in the Washington, North Carolina Dispatch in 1861, and it mentions a young African-American woman named Nancy Wiggins, presumed to be a runaway from Martin or Washington County. She was jailed in the Beaufort County Jail in Washington, and this advertisement was to try to get her owner to come pick her up and pay for what it had cost to house and feed her while they were trying to find her owner. The notice says that she lived with John Herod. That's almost certainly a misspelling or a typo. Undoubtedly, it has to be John Sherrod, who owned a large plantation in Martin County near Hamilton. And here's the interesting part. She said that she had stayed at Thomas Armstead's house and a Mr. White of Plymouth. So I ran this past the Underground Railroad folks, the National Park Service, and that was not good enough to get me in the door as far as officially declaring this an Underground Railroad site. They said that I needed to find more stuff, and I will continue to look for that. But it does say for sure that a young African-American woman who was seeking her freedom for some reason found her way to this house. So that's important. Need to move along here a little bit. This is just a clip from the Raleigh News and Observer about Reuben Pettiford being elected to the Plymouth Town Council in 1882. I mentioned the trap doors earlier. On February 11th, 2011, we could not open the other trap door that you saw on the first slide. It had been securely nailed shut for some reason. But Marvin Spencer, who's a friend of mine, he's a boat builder, did open this on February 8th, 2011. And I'm gonna play a quick video here. I don't want to get too close to my time here, but I'm gonna play about a 3-minute video of Marvin's conversation as he goes into the trapdoor.
So what you said, tell Marta, tell your wife there's $1,000 in just the doors.
Yeah, yeah.
This is Jerry Thompson, who was a curator at the museum.
Okay, so it went out the front here.
Yeah, we ran out the front, right underneath where the window is.
So it's all filled in.
Yeah, they filled it in with dirt. And we went right down underneath the church and that other brick house right there, down yonder. And the houses had collapsed because the tunnel caved in after they were built. And it cracked up both houses and the people abandoned them. And there used to be a road over there.
Yeah, I heard.
There used to be a road over it. And then they took the road up and they put the oil heater here.
What do you see, Marvin?
Well, there's a little bit of a dimple in the ground here where the dirt is set. That's really all you can see.
Well, can you see anything up towards where the piano is?
No, but that's where the original house wall was.
Yeah.
The foundation, right on the wall of the building is.
That other trap door was actually in the original house.
Okay. So right where that piano is sitting, that was the end of the house. And then,
All the rooms in there and on.
the house was only as wide as this room is here. That was it.
Yep.
Wow.
What do you see down there indicating that there was a tunnel there, Marvin? Is it pretty
Well,
clear?
you can't really see anything that indicates other than that there's a On recess in the ground where the dirt is settled,
Mm-hmm.
it's filled with water, and it's about, I don't know, 6 feet long or something like that, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't see in the brick. I was hoping maybe there'd be you can see in the brick where it was cut through, but I think if we could get the water out of here, you know, when it dries out, maybe.
Rain so much lately.
Yeah, maybe dig it out, and because you can maybe find where the brick opening was, right?
Can you see that there was a fireplace on that front, on the end wall? That's where they did.
Oh, that's why they put the little mantle across there. There sure
This was in what was the cellar.
They had a little fireplace.
They had a fireplace down there where they cooked in.
And the whole mantle is collapsed now.
Right.
And it just fell in down here, so it was open underneath.
Yes.
Oh, so they laid down here.
Oh, yes. There was dirt there. All that dirt down there wasn't there. It was head high.
It was okay.
It was head high. And they tried later on, somebody just hauled dirt in here and threw it in. And like I say, they lived in that room and they cooked in the fireplace down there, so up here in the house.
This just kind of messes with your mind. What was this used for? Why was there a cellar there? Why are the trap doors there? Why is this tunnel supposedly there? Anyway, I have to rush things along here a little bit. Jackie Shelton Green, the North Carolina Poet Laureate, who was an old friend of mine from my days in Chapel Hill, had hoped to be here, but she couldn't make it, but she did write a poem about the house, and she recorded it, and we're going to hear that next.
When the home of the wasp nest is quiet, the house weeps alone, remembering. The windows have forgotten what light feels like, streaming through the cracks on a cold winter morning. The doors count faces, voices, footsteps, travelers, journeymen, craftsmen, cooks, seamstress, day laborers, families from up north, coming, going, remembering. The back door will not speak the names or remember the faces of men, women, babies, seeking shelter from dark history. So many shadows, so many ghosts, stirring the dust, rewinding stopped clocks, remembering. Stories crawl from every room. Tiny rat bones, skulls of small birds, hawk feathers, dried snake skins hide in corners, old coins, torn Bible pages, strands of pink ribbon, a wedding photo ripped in half, lifted by the wind. Secrets folded perfectly of a runaway slave, hidden inside sleeves of a ruined coat, tucked safely under the porch steps. The pockets hold versions of another unfinished story. Remember, the house is out of breath. So many years, so much life. Ceilings that sang out loud, shelves of forgotten letters, a kitchen that offered more than soup and bread, chairs that gathered the tiredness of not-so-free bodies, peeling walls, scattered photographs, whisper with the ghosts that hold stories beneath the floorboards, remembering. The faded red velvet couch still sighs from Saturday night, late night gin, baptized clean with Sunday morning hope. Sunday dresses, heavy dark curtains, fine china, pieces of shattered crystal, pewter pots and pans, well-used teacups, a pair of lace gloves, remembering segregated misery, segregated joys, segregated dreams. When the hum of the wasp nest is quiet, the house weeps alone.
So that concludes my presentation. I don't know how much time we might have left for questions, but before you leave, I do have some information up here about the house and how you can make a contribution. We do have an account at Southern Bank and Trust in Plymouth, North Carolina. That is where any contribution would go. Thanks very much for your attention, and thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yes. Thank you, Willie.
Big hand, Willie Drye, award-winning author, editor, contributing editor to the National Geographic News, and the chairman of the Plymouth Museum Council. Thank you, Willie. And please visit the website, contribute, help save our history, help save our heritage, and help us repurpose it. You can see the good work that he's doing. And we're also hoping to plan a reception at some time. So continue to check the website this summer for a reception down in Plymouth, way down in northeastern North Carolina. So thank you again, Willie, and get yourself ready for our next presenter. Thank you again.
Anybody wants to get over